from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to the All Indiana Podcast Network, and I'm Reverend Charles Harrison. And on this episode, I want to talk about why I believe that maybe the Black church is the only institution in America today that can really help address the issue of urban violence and mass incarceration that has disproportionately impacted the Black community for decades now. Stay tuned. Welcome to the All Indiana Podcast Network, and this is Reverend Charles Harrison. And it is such an honor to be with you with my podcast on the day, and I hope that you are really having a blessed day today. Yesterday, I had a very interesting conversation, and for many of you know, I am a part of a faith-based group of Black churches. They came together about 26 years ago in the city of Indianapolis to really try to address the issue of violence in the city. Many of us, decided to get involved. We were younger pastors at the time because we were, really trying to help address the issue that was disproportionately impacting, particularly on the west side of Indianapolis in the 46208 zip code. So there was about, I would say initially about 10 churches. Then, it kind of grew from there. As pastors were coming together, trying to figure out, how we help out with the issue of crime and violence that seem to be almost nightly on the news. And too often we would see on the news, or some of us would be driving in and out of the neighborhood, and certainly we would see the presence of police, sadly too often, crime tape where something had happened in the neighborhood. Someone was either shot or injured or shot or killed, and it was happening too often. For me, it was not just the area of the city where my church was located, but it was also in the neighborhood where I lived. And too often, going from my house to the church was in the 46208 zip code, the 46205 zip code, which is where I live at. Those two zip codes were, two of the 3 or 4 zip codes in Indianapolis back in the 90s that was leading the city when it came to violent crimes, particularly homicides or criminal homicides or murders in the city. So, I was a part of a group of pastors that decided, that we could help out based on listening to the story of Black clergy coming out of Boston in the Dorchester neighborhood, and when they really talked about their impact on violence. And I think listening to Reverend Eugene Rivers and Pastor Jeffrey Brown, their story about what the Black churches did in Boston based on an incident that occurred at a funeral in one of the Black churches in Boston in Dorchester neighborhood, I think really inspired a lot of us pastors, and certainly probably gave us, hope that at least we could help out as the churches. We never really thought back in the 1990s, when we first started talking about it in 1998, and eventually we launched in 1999 the faith-based initiative, the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition, that our role would be a significant role we just felt like that we were going to be helping out what neighborhoods were already trying to do, what law enforcement and the city were doing. We were a part of that team. You can include in there the prosecutor's office, the sheriff's department, because at that time, INPD did not cover the whole city of Indianapolis. There were areas of the city that the Marion County Sheriff's Department were responsible for, back in the late 90s when 10 Point, got started. So for us, it was that we could certainly try to help impact the level of violence as the church. I don't think we ever got to the point where we saw the church as such a significant piece of this equation to address urban violence that our presence, in this issue was so critical that it probably could not be achieved without us. And I think as I look back over it over the last 26 years, since 1999, I think my viewpoints have somewhat changed over that period of time. From the time I got started, and I was certainly in my late 30s at the time when I got involved in 10 Point. I had been pastoring in Indianapolis probably about 5 or 6 years, before I got involved in this initiative. And I really wasn't for sure what the impact of our organization would be, on this issue. I certainly was hoping that we would have some level of impact as the ministers did in Boston, but I never really fully understood, what that would look like as far as what we would be able to accomplish as churches in Indianapolis. And I think, year one in 1999, when we launched in January of 1999, I think I was somewhat surprised by the impact that the church community was having in partnership with the city of Indianapolis, with INPD, with other law enforcement agencies, with what was happening in the prosecutor's office, probation, and the sheriff's department, the great collaboration that was taking place in all of us working together to try to address this issue of urban violence. And I know there were other groups in the city that were doing similar kind of work as 10 Point, particularly in Hallville with the West Side Ministerial Group there, and Olgen Williams with the Christamore House. They were doing similar things as far as boots on the ground, in that neighborhood, and they were having, remarkable results on the ground too, as the Christamore House partnered with black pastors in Hallville. So when you look at what was going on in Hallville with the West Side Ministerial Group, what was going on, on the West Side in several neighborhoods, Crown Hill, Highland Vicinity, at that time, the United Northwest area, which Riverside, Mapleton Fall Creek, Citizens around 16th and College, and then we also had a presence in the Meadows, because we had one of our churches that was in that neighborhood. We were surprised, from January of 1999 to the end of the year, that in most of those neighborhoods, and I think they calculated it up, that there had been a 40% reduction in criminal homicides from the time that we started in partnership with all of these other stakeholders in the city, that all of us working together, we saw a significant result as far as reduction in violent crimes, and particularly homicides and criminal homicides are murders. Criminal homicides and murders are the same thing. So we saw, a dramatic impact in that. And certainly it gave us a lot of momentum. I think it boosted our morale as an organization, that our presence on the ground had been impactful, significant. And from that time, I still didn't fully comprehend what role the church could really play long term. I don't think that at the time, when I first became part of 10 Point, I really didn't see it as something that we were going to be doing for a long period of time. And I never, thought that 26 years later, we would still be on the ground as 10 Point, trying to help address the issue of urban violence. But over that period of time, from 1999 until 2025, which is where we are today, 79 times in almost 20 different hotspot areas in Indianapolis, our target group was young men of color between the ages of 12 years old and 24 years old. A lot of people ask, well, why did you choose that age bracket? Because particularly between 15 at that time in 1999 and 24, almost half the deaths of black males was a result of homicides. So that 50% of males between the ages of 15 and 24, their deaths was homicides. It was the leading cause of death for that age group, 12 to 24 years old. As we look back 26 years later, homicide now is the leading cause of death for black males in America between the ages of 1 year old and 44 years old. So we have seen a dramatic nationally increase in the impact of homicides and murders when it comes to black males in America today. And one of the things I wanted to throw in there, because of that high percentage of murders and homicides among black males in America, most of the time the suspect, 90% of the time, the suspect was also black, which meant when there was a solving of the case, then the suspect was black, which also helped increase the number of black males who were being incarcerated, or females, because now we're seeing a lot more females who are involved in this kind of violent crime, within the African American community. And the incarceration rate is around 37%. I know that's gone down some, over the last few years because of a lot of work that's being done by a lot of different groups, in cities all across America to try to address those root causes and deal also with, justice reform, particularly when it comes to these nonviolent crimes like addicts and stuff who were being locked up and given longer prison terms, for most of them just being addicts, are selling at the time, crack cocaine, which was leading to longer prison terms. So all of those things was impacting what was happening in neighborhoods across Indianapolis, and particularly in the areas where 10 Point, was patrolling. For those who are just joining, this is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And I'm talking today about the role of the church when it comes to addressing this issue of urban violence, and what should that role be. After 26 years, certainly I have a different viewpoint on this issue and what the role of the church should be. I think that the church's role is critical now. And I'm not for sure that there's any other black institution in America today that can really address this issue and help turn this around and reverse these numbers. Now, I'm trying to be respectful to all of the black elected officials, but I don't think this is particularly this issue of urban violence. And I know in the black community, it's a taboo sometimes to talk about it as black on black violence, but that's what it really is. And you get into this larger debate about this issue of black on black violence with other leaders who are somewhat taken back and offended by that term black on black violence. And then there are leaders like myself who say, but that's what's really going on. And we cannot avoid talking about this issue and try to say that black on black violence is equal to white on white violence, or Hispanic on Hispanic violence, or Asian on Asian violence, or Indian on Indian violence, and we can go on and on with the different ethnic groups in this country. By far, black on black violence is by far, per 100,000, ahead of every other ethnic group in this country, by far. I think I read one statistic where black on black violence per 100,000 was nearly 30% per 100,000. That is high compared to Hispanics in this country. I think it was around 6 or 7 per 100,000, and whites around 4% per 100,000. So you see the dramatic impact of urban violence or black on black violence in communities of color. So we've been really struggling trying to address this issue over really the last 60 years. I think you go back about 60 years when this really started to be a major issue. It certainly was in the time that I was a teenager in the 70s. It was also during the time that my older brother was killed at the age of 21. The emergence of gangs and crack and those issues were emerging in large cities all across the country that was leading to very high numbers of violence, of violent crimes being committed, and homicides and murder. In the 1990s, I think it was the highest level of murders that we have seen in the history of America. And it is about the time that Boston 10 Point got started, and then near the end of the 1990s, the Indianapolis 10 Point Coalition got started in Indianapolis because in 1998, this city broke a homicide record. So from 1998 until 2025, Reverend Harrison's opinion has changed about the role of the church. I'm not for sure now that we can do this without the church. I think the church is still the most influential institution in the black community. We're certainly at the forefront when these homicides and murders are occurring in black neighborhoods. A lot of the funerals take place in our churches. It impacts a lot of the members of our church when it happens, whether it is an immediate family member, whether it can be a child, a sibling that has been killed, a cousin that has been killed, a grandchild that's been killed, a niece, a nephew. I mean, it goes on and on, the impact that it is having in the community. So the church is certainly in the center of this, because we're having to console, comfort a lot of the families that are impacted by this. And when someone is killed, hundreds of people are impacted by the homicide. A lot of times, black churches are also helping to bury the person who was killed, particularly when they're young, but not exclusively young people, because there are, middle-aged people who are killed who have no insurance either. And because of that, a lot of times the churches are having to help raise money to help bury individuals, and sometimes, for them to have a funeral, because a lot of times if they don't have insurance, the funeral home put them in something, but sometimes they don't allow them to have a funeral. They will have a graveside service. I've done a lot of those graveside services. I've done funerals for individuals who have been homicide victims or criminal homicide victims at funeral homes, and then we have also done it at the church. So we see this larger impact, on the community that involves the church. To be real about it, it's happening in the neighborhoods where a lot of black churches are located. And a lot of churches are not involved in this issue. They're not. They are involved in many other social issues. And on the periphery, there are churches that get involved in this as far as trying to address root causes to the violence. Certainly, churches have recreational programs. They have feeding programs, food pantry programs. They have initiatives that is designed to help with education, other initiatives to help with people who are coming out of incarceration, reentry initiatives to try to help people get on their feet. So there are churches that are really, really involved in what we call these root cause initiatives that is causing the violence. Then you have other churches like the 10-point churches, and not exclusively us. There are other churches that are more boots on the ground. We do the root cause stuff too. But then we do the boots on the ground initiative where we are in the neighborhoods, on the ground, in the areas where we are seeing the highest level of violence. Now, one of the things that I've noticed over the years, and it has grown, when we first started doing this in 1999, not everybody in the neighborhood was happy to see us. Not everyone in the neighborhood, saw our presence as something positive. There were drug dealers, there were gang members, there were people who were part of cliques in the neighborhoods where our churches was located, who saw us as the enemy. And I'm being truthful about that. They saw us as the enemy. Some even assumed that 10 Point was a part of law enforcement. And that was really troubling because we were the same people who were providing all of these wraparound services for people in the community to try to meet these social needs that we were seeing. And we were the same individuals who were also on the forefront of fighting these issues of social and racial justice that in our communities. But when it came to boots on the ground, when it came to dealing with drug trafficking and senseless violence, we were not always viewed in a positive way. Now, I think that has dramatically changed over the 26 years that 10 Point has been on the ground, that the church has been involved. Because people, to be honest, wasn't used to pastors being out on the street at nighttime. During the time the underground economy was flourishing, where there was drug trafficking and criminal activity. And then in 1999, you started having preachers and church members who were out in these neighborhoods where gang members were individuals who were involved in neighborhood cliques, and where drug dealers were selling drugs and where prostitutes were doing their business. And here, the preacher and people who were in yellow vests out here trying to engage individuals who were involved in this. And for a lot of people, that was very troubling for them to have black churches involved in this at that level. And there were a lot of people, I remember at first, who wouldn't talk to us. When we came around, they would go in a different direction. There was this mistrust. Well, over the years, as we have built relationships, and then when we really shifted from the black church to partnering with OGs, it really changed because we then started walking the streets with individuals who at one time, when we started in 1999 and earlier, who were some of the same people we were encountering on the street because they were involved in criminal activity or they were a part of gangs or a neighborhood clique. Now they were walking with preachers to try to address this issue. I'm not for sure if there's any other institution in the black community that can do what we do, dealing with gang members and dealing with drug dealers and dealing with individuals who are involved in criminal activity, who may be the ones that are doing the robbing of businesses or robbing of individuals. There's any other institution can be on the street and not be harmed by those involved in the criminal activity, but yet in a position to engage those individuals to try to redirect them and put them on a pathway of success. Even though there were people who did not like us being out there, there was a lot of people who did like us being out there, and there were a lot of people who were advocates for us being out there, who paved the way over the years for us to have an impact on the level of violence that was occurring in communities where our churches was located. I think the church community has to mobilize and at an even greater level. I'm somewhat encouraged this year in Indianapolis because for the first time in nearly 10 years, so far, we're just in the first part of May, we're beginning to see the numbers go back to where they used to be in this city when it comes to the level of violent crimes and what we call homicides and murders or criminal homicides. We're not quite where we were between 2000 or 1999 when we first started and 2012, which during that time we averaged about 96 murders a year, under 100, and about 114 to 15 homicides. Right now, I think in 2025, we are on pace for 150 homicides. That's been fluctuating between 140 and 150. There's plenty of time for us to lower those numbers in 2025. But right now, even at 150, it's heading in the right direction. But I think one of the key components to it is what the church is doing. And I think 10 Point is an example of the impact that churches can have on crime and violence in the neighborhoods. In 26 years, 79 times in neighborhoods that 10 Point has patrolled in partnership with IMPD and the community, 79 times it went an entire year without anyone being killed between 24 years old and under. I just go 24 and under. I know our age bracket is 12 to 24, but no one was killed even under the age of 12. So for 79 times since 1999, no one was killed in these hotspot areas that 10 Point patrols in partnership with IMPD and the community in those areas. 46 times in those same areas, which is about 20 hotspot areas across Indianapolis that we have patrolled at some point over those 26 years. 46 times, no one was killed of any age. So 79 times, there was no youth homicides, 24 years and under. We'll just go under because we do 12 to 24 in that bracket. No one was killed from 12 to 24, and no one was killed even under the age of 12. And 46 times, no youth nor adult was killed in the 20-some odd hotspot areas that Indianapolis 10 Point Coalition has patrolled. Now, that is the impact of the church. For those who are now tuning in, this is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Now, just think about that. About 15 churches have gotten involved in this issue of urban violence by putting boots on the ground in hotspot areas, particularly on the west side, but now we have some teams on the far east side because we have a couple of 10 Point pastors that are on the far east side. But in our areas, we have seen dramatic reductions in violent crimes. What that says to me is that the church is having an impact in partnership with law enforcement and other community stakeholders. Now, if we were able to mobilize churches citywide to not just address root causes to violence, but be on the ground in these hotspot areas and engage those who are most likely to be the victims and the perpetrators of this violent crime, I think the impact would be even greater. But the black church has to lead the way. We can no longer afford to be in the background, but we have to lead the way. We have the largest audience every week, whether it be Sunday morning worship services or weekday Bible study classes or events that take place in our churches all during the week, which impacts hundreds or thousands of people. We are in a position in the community as clergy and churches to have the greatest impact on helping to stem the level of violence that we're seeing that is disproportionately impacting communities of color. We have to step up as the black church. We have to step up and lead and not follow. We have to use our resources as churches, bringing them together to help address this issue and raise it to a higher level. I think part of the problem is it has not been lifted up by leadership in this community and churches to the level in which we need to lift it because of its importance. And the black church can address it. We can address it on Sunday morning. We can address it during the week through spiritual enrichment opportunities that we provide for people, like Bible study and other kinds of studies that we conduct in our churches, and through the programs that we offer in our churches that touches young people, young adults, children, teenagers, and families. We have to lead. And without the black church leading this thing, we can go another 60 years and this issue is still going to be a major problem in black America. We should not be 13% of the total American population, but every year we're 50% or more of the homicide victims. That's just mind-blowing. We ought to be disturbed by that as the black community, that we are 13% of the national population, but over 50% of the homicide victims or more each year. That is a crisis. And with a crisis, which is not just physical, but it's a spiritual crisis. It's a spiritual crisis of what's happening in our community when it comes to our young people and now young adults and some older individuals who haven't grown out of that lifestyle, that are still living that lifestyle, who are still involved in the streets, that is leading to either them being the suspect or the victim of a violent crime. This is a spiritual issue that the church has to be in the forefront in. This is the issue between God and Satan, good and evil, a moral compass and a lack of a moral compass, respect for the sanctity of human life and disrespect for the sanctity of human life. This is an issue of too many homes where there are a lack of good fathers that are fathering their sons and daughters. This is a call for the village to come together and help be a family for those who may not have a dad or mom in their home, who may not have a grandfather or aunts or uncles to help raise them. This is why the church has to be at the forefront. We have been at the forefront of every major issue that we have faced in America since we came to this country as slaves. Through slavery, through Jim Crow, through racial and economic injustices in this country, the church has always been at the forefront. We cannot shy away from this issue and other issues that is driving the violence that we're seeing disproportionately in black neighborhoods across this country. And I'm saying to pastors and the churches, we got to be at the front of the line. We have to lead and be the voice of God. We have to initiate strategies and programs and initiatives that helps bring the level of violence down and save our young people from this madness. But we have to do it as the faith community. The black church has to lead this. If we don't, we're going to be dealing with this for another 6 decades. We have to be the light of Christ. We have to provide direction, a strategy that deals with this issue of urban violence. We have to be fed up enough that enough is enough. And if we don't have that mindset, if we don't have that attitude, then every year we're going to continue to see on the news black faces, either the victim or the perpetrator of violent crime. We're going to continue to have churches and funeral homes that are having funerals for individuals who are the victim of urban violence every week. We're going to have mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers and sisters and brothers and cousins grieving over the loss of their loved ones because this issue continues to destroy our community. Haven't we had enough, black church? We cannot just preach about Jesus on Sunday morning in the pulpit and not show the love of Jesus to our community that is broken and hurting right now. We cannot give up on these young people because there are circumstances that has led them down the wrong path. And if we're truly going to be the light of Christ, then we have to engage them where they are. On the street corner, in the drug house, or the house where drugs are being sold, where these young people are hanging out with guns. We cannot be afraid, and we have to lead. We have to be in the front of this issue. It's never going to change if we don't get in front of this and lead as the black church. I believe that if we do that we're going to see dramatic reductions in violent crimes in neighborhoods all across America. If we would do that, if we would work in partnership with law enforcement and city government and other community stakeholders, we can dramatically bring the level of violence down, but we have to lead. And there's no other institution, in my opinion, in the black community that has the strength and the credibility like the black church. And now we have to use what God has given us. We have the credibility, we have the numbers, and we have the strength to lead our people out of this wilderness into the promised land. So let's be the church, and let's lead on this issue of urban violence. Because if we do, we can make our neighborhoods safer and better and save hundreds of thousands of our young people from a life of crime and violence and trauma that too many of them are experiencing every day. This has been Reverend Harrison on Real Talk, and I hope that you have enjoyed this conversation today that I've had with you about the issue of urban violence and the role of the church in helping to stem this epidemic that has crippled Black America for 6 decades now. If you have enjoyed this podcast, I ask that you subscribe to this podcast by sharing it on Facebook and X or other social media sites. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I pray that this conversation has inspired you and impacted you in such a way that you want to get involved and make a difference. This has been Reverend Harrison, and I pray that you have a blessed and awesome day. Peace.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.